Hey everybody, it's Rory from A&S Gear, and we're going to look at a bolt install today for the A5, the X7, but not the X7 Phenom, just the standard X7. So A5, X7, 98, and then all the sub versions of that, like the Alpha Blacks, the Project Salvo, Sierra 1, like all those particular guns could use this bolt system as well. So what this is an aluminum bolt tip with a spring behind it, like this, so that if the gun was to shoot and the bolt starts to come forward and the ball hasn't dropped all the way in, instead of the bolt being forced to cut through the ball and continue forward, the bolt is able to collapse down and compress the spring down so that it does not smash the paintball. The linkage arm that rides inside this groove that goes up back here to the striker that normally would force the bolt forward and through the ball is able to slide forward, continue moving forward without pushing the bolt forward and allowing the spring to compress in the backside. So we've shot it outside. It works amazingly. You can see the bolt. We've installed it into this one already. It's down in there, and I'm able to push on the bolt and collapse that bolt down by hand. So it works really, really well. But we're going to open up the gun, and so you can see how it looks inside there and what you would need to do to put one in. So obviously, first thing, make sure your gun is degassed, that doesn't have any tank on it or anything. We're going to pull the feed neck off just because it's easier to get into the gun and work with it with that out, and it can lay flat right here. A couple things we do need to take off. We're going to take the sandwich side, so the left side we're going to be working on. I've noticed that if the ASA is too tight against the bottom, that sometimes it will not let the left half or the halves of the body separate apart. So we're going to get the magazine out of here because we don't need this. It really doesn't do anything. It's just in the way. We're going to, my battery is dying. So we're going to start this off, just loosening this one up on the bottom, just so it gives it a little bit of wiggle room to move up. If we really wanted to, we could pull this thing all the way out, but I don't really need to do that yet. So let's get all the other screws off of here. And I'm leaving the screws in the body. I'm not actually taking them completely out. That way, I'm less likely to lose something. All right, so now I've got all of my screws out. I'm going to be careful and try not to, as I lift this up, let anything go shooting out all over the place. So I'm holding down the striker with my finger. I'm using the cocking knob that sticks out the side to kind of hold that down. This is going to allow me to lift the side up without everything inside wanting to just uncompress because of the spring and flip off of there. I can kind of gauge how this is going to move. If I feel like it's not going to come apart, I can kind of let go of it, and then I can move this out of the way. Now, I did get a couple pins that came out, and what else came out of there? Yeah, so my sear assembly came out, which I didn't want to come out, but it did. That's okay. We're going to put that pin back in place right there. And we are going to pull the sear assembly out. Make sure I didn't lose any other pins. I didn't. Set that over here. All right, so our sear assembly goes right back in here. Now on your sear assembly, if you open this up to take this apart and your sear assembly comes out, if you look very carefully at where this mounts into the gun, you can see that it has a flat side to it. So I'm not talking about the sear itself. These little parts that rotate around, the sear pin, part of the housing is flat. And if you look at the cutout, there's a flat side to it as well. So you want to make sure that you put the flat sides in where they need to go, and it should just drop right into place when you do that. Otherwise, when you go to put the shell back together, if that is not lined up properly, you'll smash it. The sear will pinch and it won't be able to move, and then you'll run into other problems as well. So just make sure that happens. So we got all sorts of things going on right here, which are going to be fun to fix in a little bit. But at least you'll get to see how we need to fix those things when we go to put this back together. So I'm going to uncompress this spring. I'm going to hold on to the rear bolt is what they call this. A lot of people refer to it as the striker, but the rear bolt, uncompress the spring and just pull the spring out and set it to the side. It'll allow us to work more closely with this piece right here. From this point we can grab, you could pull this out if you wanted to, but what I'm going to do is grab it and kind of rotate it like this. That makes the linkage arm right here kind of pop up. And then I can pull the linkage arm out, and I need a towel real quick to try to, these things are kind of greasy. Don't want to get my table surface here super dirty. So we're going to put those up there, move this down so you can see it. Our detent popped out, which is okay. And then the bolt and spring, I'm going to pull these out. And we have been using this one and testing it outside, so you can see that there's a little bit of just oil and schmutz on this thing. So I'm going to clean it up. We've been running it through its paces, trying to get it to break paint, seeing what causes it to break paint, if it even does break paint, all sorts of stuff going on right there. All right. Let's now put this back together and kind of show you how it is. So from this point right here, we don't need to really change anything else to it. What we do need to finish up is just installing the bolts into it, which I'm going to do with the new one. I'm going to leave the old one out, putting our detent back in, putting our arm back in, and then making sure everything is just lined up the way it should be. All right, so first things first, I'm going to actually pull the rear bolt or striker, whatever you want to call it, all the way out. And then I'm going to make sure that that is properly in place. All right, so I know my sear is in the right spot. I can reinstall my rear bolt, and I'm going to rotate it down again so that I can get to the linkage arm assembly. I'm going to take my new bolt. I'm going to put it on. Oops, sorry. I'm going to take my new spring and put it on. And then I'm going to put my new bolt on there as well. I kind of want to show you what this does or how it works before I reassemble it. So we're going to put this in here, and then we're going to put this in here. We're going to fold them back into place right here. So normally the way this works, and it's easier to see when it's disassembled like this, is the gun is cocked back right here, right? The sear is lifted up, and we'll actually put the sear up so it's catching on there, like that. You pull the trigger, the solenoid activates, moves up and down like this. It pushes this rod up, which releases the sear, so it goes click. This starts to move forward under this spring tension right here. So this spring is pushing the back bolt forward, or the striker forward like this. At the same time, remember that a ball is sitting in the breech right here. Try to push it up. So the ball's in the breech. You pull the trigger, it starts to come forward. The bolt is pushing the ball forward. It is not actually fired at this time. It is just pushing the bolt or the ball forward into the barrel. When the rear bolt comes forward and strikes the valve, which is inside here, it releases air out through the front of the power tube and pushes the ball out this way. So normally what would happen if we were to encounter a ball that was not all the way in the breech, let's say it was only halfway in, and the bolt ran into it right here because the rear bolt is moving forward and it is attached to the front bolt. If this is moving, this has got to move, and it would just force the bolt through the ball and just break it. Now what is able to happen is if the ball is in the breech but not able to be fired, as this comes forward, you can see that the back bolt can move still. The linkage arm can move all the way forward and still even fire the gun. So that it can strike the valve and release the air, but the bolt is being held back by the ball. Okay. So even if there's a ball in the breech that is causing the bolt not to be able to cycle, the hammer won't slice it through there and cause it to break. So that's how this works. That's how this spring assembly works right here. If it doesn't encounter any problems and is able to push the ball right out, it just does. But if it does encounter a problem, like my finger, then it would just go, it would just move back and forth with my finger in the way. So that's what we're looking at right here. And that's how this assembly works. Pretty cool. All right, so let's put this back together real quick. Let me clean off some of these parts since I've got it open. Our ball detent. I see a lot of people when they open these guns up and they put these in, they put them in backwards. Make sure that the ramp is in such a way that as the bolt comes forward, it can push the ramp down. If you install it this way, bolt's going to come forward and bend that ramp back and just cut it right off. So make sure that that's properly installed inside there. Our spring hasn't popped out of there yet, which is good. These are actually held in place now, even better. They used to be on the old versions, they'd pop right out of there as soon as you took them out. All right, so now down in here, we've got our pins still in place. Sometimes some of these pins will get stuck in the other side of the receiver, so you just make sure you put them back in. We have our spring returns, our trigger return spring right there. The one thing that did pop out was our sear spring, which is here. We want to put that up into our sear and then force it down into its little pocket right there. Now these ones can be squirrely. If you're not careful, it will pop out and then you'll lose it. Absolutely lose it. So be careful with that. I'm going to unplug this because it's going to be easier to put this back on and then plug in the battery later. It'll make it so we don't need to know exactly where our battery is sitting when we go to put that together. I'm going to take these grips off real quick too. That way I can see through the window in the grips, make sure that my wiring is okay. All right, one thing we do need to fix real quick is the magnet assembly down here, and we need to put our screws back in. So what happened is when we open this up, the magnet, which normally sits in this little slot right here and makes sure that the sear the solenoid fully retracts every time you cycle it, it popped out. So we're going to put it back into its groove right there. You can see it sits down here, not behind it. So when this fires like this, the magnet makes sure that it pulls back. And you can see every time I push on this, you see how our solenoid moves back there. This magnet is typically held in place by the other half as well. So we want to make sure that it sits properly in its groove. We're going to take these nuts off of here. These are the nuts that our two ASA screws pass through to hold them in place. I'll put those back in a minute. And that goes together. So everything looks good inside here. Sear spring's in the right spot. Trigger return spring. All the mechanisms look good inside of here. We should be able to take this and just lay it right down on top and put that in there. So we're going to do that. First thing we need to do is compress this down. So inside here, this is our cocking knob. There's a hole. The spring needs to pass through the hole right there. So when we drop this in, we want to make sure that it is facing in the right direction to allow the spring to pass through. This O-ring always tricks people up right here. This just floats around inside there. It does not sit in a particular spot. It just floats right there. We get a lot of people that look at that and they think that it has come out of place or out of position, or it's missing or goes somewhere. I don't know. It doesn't. It just floats around inside here. So just put it right like that towards the back. You'll be perfect. It's just a bumper. When this comes back, to keep it from slamming against this piece, they put a little O-ring in there and use it as a bumper. All right, so now I'm going to just drop this in place, trying to just line everything up the best I can, and then I'm going to push. If I've done it correctly, I should be able to just sandwich these two halves together and it should easily go into place. Sometimes something will be slightly off and you'll need to kind of work it and get it to go back together. If it doesn't want to go back together, never, ever, for any reason, force it. Open it back up, see why it didn't want to go back together, and then try again. Never force it. All right. Now we can put this back like this. Run our two ASA screws through. Get our battery. Put our battery back in. Which one we might need to go head first in there. There we go. Put our grips back on. And that's it. Then we'll put our feed neck on, our magazine back on, and then I'm just going to test it with my fingers. What's going on here? There we go. To make sure that I get that spring compression like I need on the inside there. So we'll get that on. Like that. Take our feed neck. Oh, doing it backwards. Like, why isn't that fitting? That goes on there. And we can even fold this down and you can see it springing back and forth inside there. So that's good. Magazine on. Right there. If I wasn't doing so much talking, that install right there probably takes 7 minutes or so at the most. So it's an easy install to do, simple parts upgrade. Really will keep the gun from breaking and chopping a ton of paint. It's a great upgrade to have. So check it out on the website. Core anti-chop bolt with spring for the A5, the 98, the X7, and then all those subguns of the same family. Get it at ansgear.com.